This is a Muscle Cat Media production. We may sound distinguished, but believe me, we're not.
Back on the Expats as we continue to count down to Major League Baseball opening day, but also celebrate the end of the World Baseball Classic. And to do that, we've brought a Venezuelan, or somebody who claims to be half or a quarter or an eighth Venezuelan. And he's just a regular on the show. He's a co-host, Eric Bolnar. Eric and Spoon are with me as we count down toward the Major League season. But in all seriousness, Eric, you waited until Venezuela were hoisting the trophy yesterday to tell us that you had Venezuelan roots. What's that about?
Look, it's been a bit of a running joke among some of my friends here. I'm quite close with a few Venezuelans here in Adelaide, and that's who I was watching the game with yesterday as well. And one of my friends is very Venezuelan. His name's Ricardo. Shout out to Ricardo. He's just been in Australia for a couple years. His English is really, really good, but there's always a few new words that he's always learning. And he's so Latino. He's so Venezuelan. But we always joke, that I'm basically the same as him because my dad was born in Caracas in Venezuela. He lived there for approximately 5 months before moving to Chile, he was of Czech parents, by the way. So he was a son of Czech parents who was born in Venezuela, moved elsewhere in South America and back to Canada when he was 6. So he can't speak a lick of Spanish. I have absolutely zero Spanish heritage, but legally, my father was born in Venezuela, which makes me, by nature of it, half Venezuelan. So we always sort of joke about that I am half Venezuelan. So I claimed it yesterday, and it's where my dad was from. I would for sure be eligible to play for Venezuela at the World Baseball Classic, right?
See, this all to me feels like, Spoon, in direct contrast to the argument that Eric was trying to make just 2 days ago on this very program, that people on these steady league teams, you should be well and truly Venezuelan or Italian, as he wanted to make an argument for. First of all, hello to you, but are you buying or selling that Eric should be eligible to play for Venezuela and or claim that his country won the World Baseball Classic?
I think what we landed on was like a vague kind of rule of cool, wasn't it? Where like if it's cool enough, it works. So I feel like this ultimately fits into what we landed on as a solution for nationality. So I'm going to give it to him. And at the same time, he kind of closed the most recent episode highlighting all the times his teams have gone close and missed. So this strikes me as a guy who needs a win, and it's not in my nature to deny a man like that.
Well, look, Vinny Pasquantino, his dad, Dennis, was born in America, and Vinny played for Italy. My father, Michael, the Venezuelan name of
Miguel, we'll call him.
Yeah, Miguel. Michael Robert, his name is Miguel Roberto Bolnar, the Venezuelan powerhouse name, was born in Venezuela. Vinny's dad, not born in Italy. I mean, you do the math here. I'm closer to the Venezuelan national team. I can dance like a Latino. I'm basically Venezuelan.
You hear a lot about girl math when it's like, hey, I have to purchase this because it's on sale. So basically I saved money. This is Eric math. Somehow you're making it fit into the box that you want it to fit in.
We've got more links for you, right? Donald Trump, what has he been calling Venezuela over the last 48 hours, right? The 51st state. That's because Canada has been called the 51st state as well over the last year and a half. Where am I originally from? Canada. You know what? Like, maybe that means I would be half American. Who knows? I'm just kidding, by the way. Shout out to it's a sensitive subject. So shout out to all the Venezuelans out there.
In all seriousness, what a game, right? I mean, Spoon basically declared Venezuela the bet of the century in the final and told us after Bryce Harper hit a 2-run home run to tie the game late that he had cashed out his bet. So he had declared them, was able to profit off of them, but still felt like they weren't going to hang on. Spoon, what were you feeling the last couple innings of yesterday's game?
It was a weird one. I think I got on at 3:30 in the end. And I reckon I cashed out about 80% of the full payout when they were 2-0 up at the top of the 8th. It's had a bad kind of feeling about it. and it was like close enough to a full payout that I took it. Then I felt like it was a genius move, obviously, when Bryce ties at 2-2. And then almost immediately after that, Venezuela retook the lead, and I felt like a little bit of a coward. But ultimately, since it was a team that I wanted to see win, I wasn't too upset, take 80% of the payout and the USA lose. I think it was a decent result all round. I've definitely had worse.
It was a pretty clutch moment for Bryce Harper, and it was cool to see that. Look, I think we were all kind of cheering for Venezuela because, as we talked about earlier in the week, it's probably better for this tournament if the United States doesn't win it because it keeps them hungry, it keeps the good players coming back, and it keeps the competition fierce. But with Bryce Harper sort of clutching up in that moment, it kind of highlighted the fact that Captain America, Aaron Judge, really has not done anything in big moments. And I just noticed after the game last night that he was getting completely obliterated online. Like anywhere you looked on Reddit, anywhere you looked on Twitter, everybody was just questioning the clutchness of Aaron Judge. And I guess I'd never really thought about it. I mean, he was good in the postseason last year. I think he had like a 1,300 OPS in the postseason last year in 7 games. And maybe pitching, for the most part, was their issue in the postseason last year as opposed to Aaron Judge. But really, when you do look at his numbers across all of his postseason appearances, he's not been great. And that kind of translated over to clutch moments in tournament baseball. So are we at a point now? And then he was asked yesterday after the game, I saw that it said, when this happens in a World Series in the postseason, you've got to wait another 6 months. In this instance, you sort of get, a chance to go back to work in the next week. And, you're a week away from opening day. And he says, well, this sucks. He's like, so I'm more keen to get back here than I am to think about opening day, which I thought was really interesting. So for me, it was sort of two things. It was kind of like, oh, actually, we talk about Aaron Judge as this Herculean guy, but there have been these moments of, chances to be clutch, a la what Bryce Harper was in the late stages of that last night's game. We've never really seen that from Judge in big moments. But also, there is another guy in a laundry list. I mean, Eric talked about the Venezuelans, Ronnie Acuna saying that this ranks higher. I mean, getting a base hit ranks higher for him than winning an MVP in Major League Baseball. And Aaron Judge sort of going like, I don't even really want to think about opening day for the Yankees right now because we've just lost in a World Baseball Classic final. So it shows to me that these games matter. And maybe it does teach us a little bit about the postseason guile and the clutchness of some of these guys, despite the fact that his game's being played in March.
Well, my fascination with it all is probably more relied in linking to this with Aaron Judge as being more the philosophy behind tournament and even playoff baseball to a degree, right? I mean, Aaron Judge as being this power hitting dude, and maybe that isn't playing like you think when it comes down to these one game elimination type styles of balls. Like you just can't necessarily rely on it. That's going to disappear because it's best on best and it's hard to hit a home run, right? Like you take a look at Japan, who are still the standard of international baseball, right? I mean, they're going through an identity crisis online right now because they've lost 2 games in the last year and a half, right? Like, but they're in crisis because they tried to play the long ball game, right? Like they flat out openly said they want to play with power, they want to hit home runs, and they did do that, but Venezuela won by playing almost Japanese style baseball. Yeah, they kind of used the long ball to beat Japan, but think about that 3-run inning in the semifinals over Italy, right? It was great pitching, excellent defense, and it was an infield single that proves to be that breakaway moment. Think about that championship game. It was a sacrifice fly. It was a stolen base. It was just good clutch hitting to a gap. It was sound defense, and it was excellent bullpen, right? Tournament baseball is about pitching and defense and finding a clutch moment from someone in your lineup 1 to 9. And maybe they're too reliant on Aaron Judge. Like if the USA win that game 2-1, we're probably not having this Aaron Judge conversation at all. It's just the fact that they lost. When it really comes down to it, tournament baseball ain't about the power at all. At all. Maybe in the regular season, it can win you a bunch of games and you can hit your way out of trouble against lesser relievers and the aggregate works out. But tournament baseball is about pitching and it is about defense. And the teams that bowed out had pitching, had lack of execution in both of those moments throughout it. But yeah, it was a great game, and that stolen base was elite in the 9th inning.
You guys will hate this quote today. Derek Jeter on the WBC. I think the people that say it's bigger than the World Series never played in a World Series.
Yeah, but do you know who said that? You know who he was responding to? responding to Kike Hernandez, who said that he thinks the WBC has been a better experience than playing in the World Series. And Kike's played in 5 World Series and won 3 of them.
Yeah, strange comment.
A really strange comment, right? Like they're like it's Aaron Judge has played in a World Series, but Derek Jeter sort of has to defend it, right? Like he's Mr. America, Mr. Baseball, Mr. World Series, Mr. New York. I get it, but weird comment.
I think it does bring up an interesting point, though, because we're in this era of baseball we talk about all the time where you're happy to strike out 200 times if it means you're going to be a 40-plus home run guy and a 100-plus RBI guy. But that's over the course of a 162-game season. And, I mean, those things can kind of even themselves out in a 7-game series, say in a championship series or in a World Series. But you're right. Having the ability to just put bat on baseball, speed, defense, length in your pitching, a power arm out of the bullpen when you need it. It's all of those ancillary things, I think, that ultimately end up winning you titles. You're right. The long ball it's the sexy thing during the regular season. And I mean, look, there was a big, 2 big ones in that game yesterday, but ultimately they weren't the deciding factor at the end. So it is kind of this weird dichotomy when you think about the direction that baseball's going in terms of saying, look, we're happy to give up the outs if it means over the long term we get a lot of home runs, but it doesn't really work in these small, confined, tiny moments, which I think is what we've seen from the United States the last couple of WBCs.
Well, how did the Dodgers win their last 2 World Series? I'm talking postseason. Let's not talk regular season here, right? Like it's not been their offense that has powered them to a World Series title, despite this lineup being absolutely ridiculous. Like it probably got them there, but it's been pitching, bullpen, and defense, right? Think about that Game 7, right? Like it takes a couple iconic performances from the bullpen after their starting pitcher gave up a massive home run to Bo Bichette. Then it was locked down there. It was a couple unbelievable defensive plays that literally won them the World Series. One at second base, and then the other one in the outfield on that collision catch as well. And then Yamamoto doing like godlike things and then winning that extra innings game. That wasn't about offense. They didn't score a run for 9 innings until they won it in the 18th. It was all about bridging the gap with some of the lower guys. I mean, the Dodgers have won World Series because of pitching and defense in the playoffs and not the other way around like their lineup might fool you to do if you look at the dollar side.
Yeah, and Yankees defense as well, right? 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Some of those mistakes and meltdowns as opposed to just making the fundamental play.
Yeah, and I mean, look at how Japan bowed out, right? Like it came down to an error. Well, not an error. I mean, they lost 8-5, but that 8th run was because of an error. Look at how Australia bowed out. There was a couple mistakes that prevented them from being in the quarterfinals. I mean, you can just, there's probably a whole bunch of examples of just, couldn't make a defensive play and that ends up costing you. You got to play perfect defense in these tournaments, and you got to have sort of a pass the baton approach, as you've heard it a lot on the commentary. In Venezuela, man, Jackson Churio is batting 9 in that lineup. Like, that's so stupid.
Part of me was really hoping that somehow they could turn the lineup back over to Ronnie in the 9th inning and he would just do something absurd. Look, I think you sort of felt like the bird had flown and they were going to win the game anyways, but with the bases loaded, 2 outs, and Acuna at the plate, I think they would have had to have scored a run from memory for him to come to the plate, so it would have been a 2-run lead. But you imagine if Ronnie does something with 2 outs in the 9th inning, basically sealing the game, it would have been electric. Like the scenes of what we saw at the end of the game were incredible, but a part of me just wanted to see, I mean, friend of the show, a guy that we love dearly here on the Baseball Expats, Ronald Acuna. I wanted to see him get that one final chance.
Still waiting for him to get traded.
What do we think about the WBC MVP?
Great call. He was clutch the whole, like they don't win without him. He had crazy numbers. He had clutch hits and big moments. Good defense. I mean, big coming out party, right?
Yeah, I don't have any qualms. It has made me think. I was gonna post this to you guys yesterday, but I figured I'd do it in live time. It's an absurd idea, and it would never happen. But stick with me. So when Major League Baseball does expand, and we play East and West, inevitably, which is going to happen. We're going to have a Western division. We're going to have an Eastern division. If it's the National League or the American League, who cares? Doesn't matter what it is. We expand the playoffs to 16 teams, and we have 4 pools of 4 in the first round of the postseason. So East has 2 pools. West has
I like this. Make it tournament baseball.
You can then host one of those pools at the top seed. You host another one of those pools at the 2 seed. And then essentially they play 3 games in a round robin format to determine who gets to the league championship series. And then you can play a best of 7 into a World Series. Look, it would never work because it's not as many games. But can you imagine, say your team is the 2 seed. Let's say St. Louis is the 2 seed in what will probably be the East. And then they've got to play, in theory, the 3, 6, and 7.
I actually love this. That would be awesome.
The problem you'd run into is these ridiculous tiebreakers, right? Like Australia not getting to the quarterfinals because of too many runs allowed. You'd probably have to find a better tiebreaker. And maybe you play 2 games against rich teams in that.
Dude, you'd have 162 games of data behind you, right? Like,
Yeah.
if there's a tie between the 2 teams, then it would almost go back to being like, yeah, if you can't separate on the run differential, whatever that kind of looks like, well, then you know what? You revert back to what was your record in a 162 game season.
Yeah. Look, because I mean, ultimately you'd have one venue that would have the 1 seed, the 4 seed, the 5 seed, and the 8 seed. And you'd have another one that would have the 2, 3, 6, and 7. Maybe you play 2 games each. Maybe you play 6 total games, and they could play afternoon and evening across all 4 pools. Like, it would be bananas. I think it would actually be really cool. The problem is teams would never go for it because it would take away home games from them, et cetera, et cetera. And it probably isn't practical in a major league setting. Although, look, they do it in the Champions League where they play these sort of aggregate home and aways. I guess the argument against that is you do get a home game. I'd be fine with just a 1-and-1, a home and home, and sort of an aggregate type thing. Because if anything, what the WBC has reaffirmed, and we learn this every 3, now 4 years, assuming that we don't have a global pandemic in the next 4 years, that being thrust into immediate have-to-win baseball is awesome. I mean, Spoon and I talked about this late last year, that I hate the fact that they've gotten rid of Game 163 and have just gone to a tiebreaker, because Game 163 was incredible. And the wild card games are some of the best games that we get in the MLB postseason. So being thrust immediately into that must-win sort of a setup. And maybe for us, it's been that little bit better because it's March and we normally don't get meaningful baseball this time of year. But yeah, just having had the WBC the last 3 weeks has got the mind moving a little bit. So ideas are ideas, and they usually come to this podcast to die, but I think it's to be fun.
I like this idea. You could also do like team host 2 games, and then, you know, like team A plays team B at team A for 2 games, and then team C comes in and plays team A while team B goes to team D, right? Like, you could do, if you're doing a double round robin and you're playing each other twice, travel's not that hard on the East Coast, right? You do, everyone plays during the day, so you still get a balance of some home games, and then you swap them out.
Yeah, and something like that probably only works east to west, right? You can't have that in the current National League setup because you couldn't have a Boston going to a Seattle, for instance, and having to travel back and forth a couple times. But look, I thought it was interesting, and look, it'll never happen, but maybe someday you can create your own playoff scenario and
play every game at Coors.
You're never going to let that idea go.
I'm still pushing for it. Play every game at Coors. They're more central. It's going to be 20 runs a game. It's going to be awesome.
Look, as awesome as the WBC is, we are a week away from opening night, we can call it, which is oddly on a Wednesday in the United States. It'll be Thursday here in Australia. We get to hear Matt Vasgersian again, who was on the international broadcast for the WBC final yesterday. We'll get to hear him on the Netflix broadcast. It'll be good to hear Matty V's voice. We'll talk a little bit more about that opening night game next week, but one thing that we haven't really done a lot of, when I guess we did it a little bit whenever we jumped back on for the first time after the offseason, was sort of go through some of the offseason signings and maybe some of the sneaky offseason signings that may make an impact this year that weren't some of the sexy sort of headline-making signings. I know I've got a few that I want to run through, but Spoon, you were pretty keen to have a chat about this, so we'll let you be first cab off the rank. Who's caught your eye this offseason as somebody that could be a relatively significant signing?
Yeah, I've probably got a couple worth talking about. I think the first one's quite obvious. I mean, if you look at value of contract, I'm happy to ignore your Kyle Tuckers and your Bregmans and your Bellingers, but this guy was a huge signing, but just a signing to a team that no one expected, and that's Pete Alonso to the Orioles. I just think I can't remember a signing coming so out of the blue in MLB free agency for a very long time, where not a typically big spending team goes and drops, what was it, 155 million over 5 years. I thought there'd be 5 potential landing spots for Pete, and he'd likely land in New York at the end of it all. So for him to go to the Orioles, I think just jumpstarts what I have being a really big season for Baltimore, and a genuine run at the AL East and the AL pennant. So I think that one was an obvious one, but one that should definitely be spoken about a little bit. The other one that I thought was really interesting was Robert Suarez being signed by the Braves for $45 million for 3 years, because I've spoken a couple of times on the show about how last year's Brave season was kind of, over before it started, and the whole opening day rotation was pretty much on the IL by April or May. All of those guys are coming back. You've got Strider now a year removed from his Tommy John surgery. You've got Chris Sale, who still looked as nasty as ever last year, and a few other big names like Schwellenbach, who's a big name in multiple ways. What was really, I guess, the question for Atlanta was what the bullpen would look like, and going and getting a genuine closer like Robert Suarez, $45 million, 3 years. I think this is a team that's primed to bounce back and win the NL East, as we spoke about a few weeks ago. So yeah, a couple of different signings there. One, a big money first baseman, but another one, a big money reliever. And I think you look at, Devin Williams got $51 million for 3 years to go to the Mets after they missed out on Diaz. Diaz got $69 million. The money for closers now is completely different. And I think it was it maybe Iglesias who kind of set that market when he left and went to the Angels like 4 or 5 years ago. The fact that Suarez is on a lower AAV than Devin Williams is pretty crazy to me, given he's been so consistent. Devin Williams has had some massive big moment struggles. So I thought it was just sneaky good business by Atlanta, and rounds out a team where, we know we like the lineup, we know we like the rotation. Now there's that key bullpen guy. Go Braves.
Not surprising, I guess, that both of those guys come from teams that you have picked to win their respective divisions. And oddly enough, you love the Pete Alonso signing so much in Baltimore that you've declared Gunnar Henderson will be the MVP of the American League.
Well, I actually wrote down some notes too, but I was kind of approaching it in a different way to Spoon, in terms of, let's not look at the sneaky signings. Let's look at the signings that didn't happen, and why I think some misses for franchises are a good thing. And you have to remember, like, I was looking through some old reports just going back in the offseason, and, Fromber and then Zach Gallen were heavily linked in early December to the Baltimore Orioles, loosely Ranger Suarez as well. So I kind of think that it looked like Baltimore were almost like, hey, let's take a look and take a big swing at an ace and see where it goes from there. And that didn't pay off. And then they end up obviously coming from nowhere and signing Pete Alonso, and that's a big deal. But because they didn't land that ace, it probably freed up that more money to throw at Pete Alonso, but then it also allowed them to do a few other sneaky little things, right? Like, I mean, you've mentioned it before, but I think the Helsley signing is great. Trading for Boz is great. Adding Chris Bassett is going to add some really nice, like, veteran depth and flexibility, and that's sort of where they fell apart last year as well. So, they end up adding a few people early on. Andrew Kittredge as well. Like, that's a nice little relief option. Earlier, they added like Taylor Ward and Leody Tavares. Like, I think because they missed on a couple of the aces that they probably wanted, it allowed them to keep their core, add one slugger to complement the lineup, and then add in these nice little places that makes their offseason good. But I have two more good news they didn't sign this guy for you if you want them. All right, should we start? And can we agree? I want to know if you agree that it was a good thing that the Philadelphia Phillies did not land Bo Bichette, because that reported deal that the Phillies offered was big money, but it was also 7 years for a dude who would probably be aged out at the end of that. And if they sign Bichette, then Real Muto probably has to leave that team. They probably don't re-sign him. They've got to reshuffle their infield, so Alec Boehm is probably the guy out there. Then it asks questions about what their top prospect, Aiden Miller, would have to do. Maybe they have to invest that elsewhere. Then they're still exploring this Otto Kemp option, and I kind of like Otto. Then they were able to add those low-cast options like your Brad Kellers or your Garcias. But I think for a team that won 96 games last year, that would have been a crazy thing. It would have been an identity shift in that entire infield from what's made them such a good team, and they would have committed 7 years and roadblocked one of their top prospects. So, because they didn't sign Bo Bichette, it allowed them to make some other moves. What say you? Is it good that the Phillies didn't sign Bo Bichette?
Yeah, and don't forget they also gave 150 over 5 to Kyle Schwarber, who, that's a guy they were definitely keen to bring back, but you're talking about like back end of the contract value and where that's going to be. I mean, they've got some pretty gross contracts. I think like the last few years of some of these contracts, I think it's just going to age horribly. Like you look at Real Muto was probably already borderline whether they were going to bring him back. You just mentioned that they did after missing out on Bo. But like you look at, Bryce Harper's still got 5 years left on his deal, on a 13-year deal at $26 million a year. Trey Turner has 7 or 8 years left on his 11-year deal. Aaron Nola started to show a lot of like cracks last year. He's on $25 million a year to a 2030. Schwarber's now there to a 2030. Like the Phillies in 2 or 3 years could be paying hundreds of millions of dollars to guys that are at replacement level value. So I'm with you that it's good they didn't add Bo to the pile. I'm not sure that missing out on him actually makes the situation any better though, because they loom as an old team of has-beens in a few years with some contracts they're either desperately keen to get out of or they're just eating a lot of dead payroll.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was big that they didn't sign Bo, because it allows their top prospect, who is a shortstop, and your guys like Otto Kemp, who's 26 years old, and Bohm, who's 27, to actually sort of, like, if you're going to get out of this bad contract situation, you need some of those dudes to become stars. They're not going to do that if they're sitting behind Bo, right? Who would just be lumped in the same kind of pile.
Yeah, it sounds like Bo's probably going to play a lot of third base with the Mets. So I think like there was like both things can be true at the same time. That I actually think it was a decent signing for the Mets because they got him only for 3 years, and Bo's got $40+ million a year for 3 years. And if he does make that transition to third base, does it make him potentially more valuable when maybe he does go to get that larger contract? Because then potentially he is looking at a 6 or 7 year deal where he can make $300 million if he can prove that he can stay healthy. He continues to hit, and he plays a good third base, if that is indeed where the Mets move him to. I think both things can be true, that the Phillies probably dodged a bullet. But with the Mets, because their lineup is so different, with losing Nimmo, losing Pete Alonso, and bringing in some of the new guys that they did, I think both things can be true. It's just interesting that both of those teams happen to play in the same division, right? So it will be fun to sort of see how that plays out.
The 7 years is the bullet they dodged, right?
Yeah, but he may get that. He may get that deal at the end of this 3-year deal with the Mets with somebody.
He might. The other one was, and it's kind of the obvious one, is like, thank God the Toronto Blue Jays did not sign Kyle Tucker to jumbo numbers, right? Like, nothing against Kyle Tucker, the player. He's a pretty good player. That's what he is. He's a pretty good player. I think I was looking at this in terms of WAR for position players last year. He ranked like 48th or something like that, which means he's a pretty good player. He's not a great player, not a $64 million player, which is what he's going to get per year. And instead, the Jays got to add Okamoto, which has some Japanese interest, and, really invest on pitching, right? Ponce and Cease, and even watching Tyler Rogers got me excited at the WBC as well. So I think like the Jays choosing to say, you know what, instead of investing in bats, we're going to invest in pitching and fielding, which is exactly what they did instead of Bo Bichette and Kyle Tucker. The Jays are going to have some more crisis points. I get it in the future too, but I do like that in the playoffs you win through pitching, not through, they didn't get there with Bo Bichette last year, right? So I think they've shown that they can win playoff series without Bo anyways. But I think, they could have been tempted into just throwing a bag at Kyle Tucker, and they probably did throw a bag. I'm just glad that didn't come off.
Yeah, you actually raised a point there. I wanted to ask your opinion on the Okamoto deal. I know nothing about this guy at all. Do you want to enlighten me?
Yeah, well, I mean, the concern with Japanese players always is, can they hit the fastball, right? Am I wrong in saying that, Rolsey, right? Like the velo in the NPB just isn't what it is in Major League Baseball. It's a lot of off speed, and you're going to see that. Like, that's a big concern with guys like Mune in Chicago this year. So you're going to add a guy that's had that clutch factor before, whether it be Japan at the World Baseball Classic or playing for the Tokyo Giants, right? Like last year, I think he hit somewhere in like 320 or something like that. Like he had a huge year. He's played over 1,400 games in the NPB. He's got a career 270-something average. He's just been the definition of reliability. And, he can play first base. He can play third base. He kind of keeps that flexibility that, John Schneider likes in the lineup. Pretty good defensively, right? Like that's always sort of been the book on him, is that he's never really been too bad defensively. I'm just going to try to pull up what he was last year fielding wise at third base. Yeah, like a 986 fielding percentage on the year last year. So he's for $15 million, you're going to get some value from that, from a contact hitter who will show flashes of power, who's done it for a long time, and he's been able to hit the fastball in Japan, which is a good sign compared to other Japanese players who have come over.
Spoon, if I may, it's sort of, I'll put this in Spoon terms. It's sort of that first group 2 of a racing carnival here in Australia where they bring maybe a European horse down that's got a big wrap on it, but it never has run in the conditions.
Yeah.
So oftentimes you're taking it on trust a little bit with huge upside, but at the same time, probably 2 out of every 3 that come down for a spring carnival fail. And that's kind of what happens with these Japanese guys. I mean, we've seen it with countless guys, right? I mean, Seiya Suzuki is probably the most recent example of a guy who's been somewhat successful. But remember the raps that like Yoshitomo Tsutsugo had, that like he was this Japanese Babe Ruth. And once he got to Major League Baseball, he could never really just fully make the transition. But all these guys get around about the same money. I mean, pitching's a lot different. We've seen the pitching, the guys on the pitching side come over and have a lot more success, but it does just seem to, it seems to happen time and time again that these offensive guys that come over, particularly these power hitting types, it's just kind of a roll of the dice. So that's why they, I guess, sign at that amount that's palatable, like around a $15 million a year deal is probably palatable for a lot of those teams, because it goes, look, if this guy turns out to be a 7-8 WAR player, we've probably got ourselves a deal. Whereas if they fizzle out, the deal's for 3 years, it's not really going to make that big of a difference. So I guess teams just have to decide whether it's worth the risk to go out and take the chance on these guys.
Yeah, and I think that's where, if you go back 12 months, the talk about what a Murakami was going to get, just like based on some of the power numbers he was showing overseas, like there was talk of massive money. He ends up taking $34 million over 2 years to play in the White Sox. That wasn't really on anyone's radar. It's not bad business by the White Sox because, there's a saying, there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. So by the same token, how bad can a 2-year deal kind of be? But there was talk that this was a guy that was going to attract a crazy AAV and probably a crazy length as well. And all of these guys that we're talking about are on, 2, 3, 4-year deals and nothing much bigger than that.
It's not bad business by Murakami and his team either, right? Because if he comes over and he does perform, then all of a sudden he is going to get that gigantic deal. Instead of being hemmed into, if he maybe did sign a 5-year deal that was an AAV of 20 million, he may sign a 7-year deal with an AAV of 30 if he comes over and has 2 great seasons. So it could be both business. In the same way that we talked about, maybe the Phillies dodged a bullet with Bo Bichette and the Mets probably ended up with a good one. It could be something similar for Murakami. And realistically, the White Sox couldn't afford to take a chance and be hamstrung any more than they already are when they're basically trying to rebuild that team. Just trying to add a little bit of excitement and maybe get some eyeballs on them from Japan.
I think that's the big part, is the eyeballs that you're going to get there, right? Like it's just the number one sport. You're kind of now also potentially laying the foundation for a future Japanese player to come there. Like there's going to be a next guy that comes from Japan. And I mean, you're seeing it with the Dodgers, right? Like Japanese players will sign where they're comfortable with another Japanese player. So it could lay down the foundation of a guy who is very well liked amongst his teammates, both with the Tokyo Giants and on Samurai Japan. And obviously, he is going to play in a market that has a lot of Japanese people too in Toronto. So yeah, I think you're gonna see some good things, I think, from him. I think it's a pretty low risk deal, or a risk that is probably suited for Toronto. Not necessarily low risk, but a good one for Toronto to take.
I'm going to pose a question to both of you in just a moment, but I do have one guy that I want to touch on. It's a bit out of left field, but there's a few reasons why I liked this signing. And it was Gregory Soto for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And there's a few reasons why I like this. One of them, and the most obvious, is that the Pirates just have not signed guys in free agency like this hardly ever. in the last 10 years. So it seems at least that ownership group the last couple of years is starting to go, right, if we're going to build a team that's going to be able to put butts on seats and win, we're going to have to go out and we're going to have to sign guys. That doesn't mean signing guys to crazy deals, but signing guys with a lot of upside for not long-term deals that could also be valuable in multiple ways. So they get that power lefty out of the pen. Like imagine a Soto coming in the 8th inning after Paul Skeens has given you 7, right? You basically know going into a game that you've got 8 innings where essentially your pitching staff's going to be unhittable. Let's say Bubba Chandler is as good as everybody thinks Bubba Chandler's going to be. And all of a sudden, 2 out of every 5 days, you feel like you've got 6, 7, 8 innings that are sort of short up. Is he going to be their closer? I don't know. I don't know that they necessarily have decided that. He's sort of come in and out of having that closing role in his career. I mean, he hasn't really been that dominant closer since probably 21, 22, back when he was with Detroit, the 2 years that he was an all-star. But I just think the Pirates going after and getting a guy like this and then just saying, look, we're backing a starting rotation that we think is going to have a lift. Spoon and I have already talked about this, that the Pirates, the bookies think, are a better chance to win the NL Central than the St. Louis Cardinals are. And I don't remember the last time that that's happened. It probably has more to do with the Cardinals being awful. But there is a little bit of chatter around the Pirates making that right trajectory. But they got him at $7.75 million, which was, I mean, basically nothing, right? So if they are a competitive team, which, Spoon, we talked about this in the last couple of weeks, that we think potentially they could be in that division because after the Cubs, it's basically wide open. So this is a team that maybe could be fighting for a wild card spot come August and September. But probably even more importantly is if they're out of it come June, July, he's an excellent deadline chip for them to have to go out and get somebody. Yes, it's a one-year piece, but guys are always looking for lefty hard throwers out of the bullpen, right? So I think for the Pirates to end up with this guy at under $8 million is cool because I think Pirates fans finally get something to cheer about in the offseason that they've gone out and signed a guy. But I do think there's some genuine upside for a guy who's played 7 years in the big leagues. Look, he's only 31 years old. So the rest of his career is still in front of him. I just thought it was a really interesting signing that, yes, Pete Alonso getting signed for Baltimore was maybe surprising for a lot of other different reasons, but I actually thought that Soto going to the Pirates was an interesting signing as well.
Yeah, they also signed Ozuna to a 1-year, $12 million deal, which is, similar to your point. If they're out of it, then teams can come and get a DH is probably good for, a handful of postseason home runs, and has kind of been on that big stage before. And the other one, they also signed Ryan
O'Hearn.
Yeah, $29 million, 2 years. I mean, that's $15 million AAV. That's not normally Pittsburgh Pirates money. So you lump those 3 guys together, you're almost at, $50 million or $45 million worth of signings. And it does show good intent and, give them the flexibility to either compete or restock the farm, to your point.
I do just feel like having a guy like that out of the bullpen is something that the Pirates haven't really had. And if, again, with Skeens continuing to make that leap, it seems like he gets better and better every year. And if Chandler is, anywhere around a 3 ERA this year and is that type of dominant arm that they think he can be, it just adds that little bit that opposing teams have to think about whenever they're potentially opposing those guys in the first 2 games of a series, right? Because you think maybe that Soto even could throw in 2 consecutive games backing up those guys.
Don't forget guys like Brandon Lau on that team too.
Well, I mean, this is what Spoon and I talked about. Like this
as well.
It's a team that when you really start to peel back the layers, I mean, I think they were, Spoon, you may have to correct me here, but they were $9 or $10, I think, to win the division.
Yeah.
And I don't know the last time that there would have been a Pirates team that was that short.
Yeah, they were shorter than the Reds, I think, which was what really jumped out as surprising. But obviously they're getting a fair bit of respect from Vegas for the moves that they're making here. And I think when you break it down, it's kind of understandable.
So let's fast forward to September. What free agent signing are we going to talk about as having been the most valuable? I mean, you've mentioned sort of Ranger Suarez. Eric, you talked about Framber Valdez. It can't be Edwin Diaz. You can't guess Edwin Diaz. That's not one of the guesses that you can have. It can't be a Dodger.
Dylan Six, because he's going to win the Cy Young.
Well, and I guess that was going to be my other one. I mean, that's 7-year, $210 million deal that he signed. Eric, I'll start with you. We're in September. Who are we talking about being the most valuable to their team offseason signing?
I mean, I probably already mentioned it earlier, and it comes from a place of bias, but like I think Okamoto has a real chance to be that guy if the Jays want to cement themselves as sort of that guy. But what about a guy like Ranger Suarez in Boston as a potential huge free agent signing that obviously it got some headlines, but it wasn't like the headline move of the offseason. I mean, if Boston, they've got a pretty okay young team. I know they missed out on bringing back Bregman and all that too. So I think there's a good chance that if Boston are good, obviously Ranger Suarez is providing a lot of depth in that bullpen. So for those reasons, I'm going to say Nolan Arenado is going to be the signing of the season.
Yeah, well, if I'm allowed to do homer picks, then obviously Merrill Kelly and I guess Zach Gallen are gonna throw perfect games in the postseason. A move that I do like a lot is Josh Naylor staying in Seattle. Obviously, Seattle picked him up from Arizona, traded a couple of their top 10 guys to get him for what at the time was a 2 or 3 month rental, but to sign him for 5 years at nearly $20 million a year. I mean, he's only just turned 28, so he's coming into his age 29 season. He kind of had a weird down year, I guess. But once he went to Seattle in that quarter of a season, he had 2.2 WAR. Like his vibes, and I watched him, mope around when Arizona were terrible. He just played a completely different level once he got to Seattle, and he's always been that big moment, high energy kind of guy. All the way back to when he was in Cleveland, and he kind of hit some of those home runs and was just screaming at dugouts saying like, I want all the smoke and that kind of stuff. I think he could be a guy that, I've got Texas winning that division, but if Seattle kind of go a couple of rounds further this year, I think we could be looking at Josh Naylor as, a support piece, if not as big a season as a Cal Raleigh and a J-Rod.
What about Eugenio?
Yeah, Cincinnati.
Yeah, why not Cincinnati?
There'll be 81 wins, I think, again. And, they'll have some fun moments, and it's a hitter-friendly park, and he'll hit 50 home runs. But I'm not sure he's moving the needle there, personally, as much as I love him. And it was, brilliant as recently as yesterday. I'll always have a soft spot for him, but I'm not sure I love the deal as much. I mean, what's he? He's 32, maybe? He's 34. Whereas, you're looking at a deal with a guy like Josh Naylor, who's been in the league for 6 years and he's just turned 28. I think there's a lot of upside for him in Seattle.
Well, look, it was good to catch up with both you boys. I know Spoon's off to Sydney for the weekend because he hasn't been on an airplane in 72 hours, and it seems to be he gets the itch or he gets a flu. I don't know. Something happens to you that if you're not airborne every 4 days, you start to get itchy feet. So Spoon's going to be on an airplane again. He'll head to Sydney this weekend. Hopefully he and I can catch up for a few frothies and try and solve the world's issues. And we will be back again previewing the opening night of Major League Baseball next week. And ahead of opening day as well, we will have our first Destiny draft with a guest player representing the listeners. All that and more coming your way next week. Boys, it is always a pleasure to see your face. Spoon, we'll see you this weekend. Eric, I'll see you next week.